Looks great. Fantastic. Hey everybody, welcome to church, which is very similar to Feminist Friday, but with a hat. Yeah, pretty good.
Oh, I didn't bring my church hat.
Oh, sorry, girl. Where's your fascinator? Please.
Or like a little scarf.
Do you want to borrow a hat? I have like 50.
I kind of want to wear a hat.
You want to wear a hat? Okay, we're gonna pause this. We'll be right back with a hat.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Oh my gosh, so much better. Oh
Take me to church.
Really? We really are. We've turned a corner here. Okay, so if you watched Feminist Friday, if you didn't, go and watch it, or you can watch it after this. But this is kind of a continuation, because this is Laryssa Vachon. She was, we've been friends. I was her voice teacher when she was in high school, and now she's finished her master's. Can you explain that just a little bit, just in case they didn't watch the first episode?
Yes, yeah. So I did my master's in journalism at UBC. And then your second year, you kind of get to pick your research topic. And my research was on Protestant Christianity and issues of sex and sexuality within that. In Western Canada specifically, but like focusing on North America as a whole, because it's very Christian.
Because you're a Alberta girl, right?
Yeah.
So we're both originally from Alberta, which means we've had a lot to detox from. A lot love you, Alberta. We love you. Best of luck in the next 4 years.
Why we're still there, because we love it so much.
People are very friendly though. People in Alberta are much more friendly than people in Vancouver. Point. So you've got that. We've got that going for us. Mm-hmm. All right. So what I wanted to discuss today, what we've been discussing previously, just the two of us, which is so fascinating, is the church changing and evolving in order to, the way I said evolving sounded like vulva to me for some reason. Evolving. There you go.
Perfect.
In the herstory of the church. Are they evolving? As far as their ethos and their approach to sexuality. Because as far as like our experience in the church, and people especially that I went to like Bible college with, and you went to Bible college with, people who were really repressed, or people who were gay and then just like didn't ever like come out, like that whole thing I feel like is starting to change. Did you, in your research, come across a change in the church in that way, like in the way that they're dealing with sexuality?
Yeah, so a lot of the people, it's really funny because the only people that would talk to me about sex and sexuality were progressive people. Like every time I tried to talk to someone who was a little bit more old school, like they would not answer my emails, they wouldn't answer my phone calls, wouldn't get back to me. So so everyone that I talked to had a few things that were changing. Well, not a lot of Christians, but a few Christians, when they talk about shame and sexuality, they use the Bible a lot.
No, a lot of Christians, yeah. Especially evangelical. Sorry about it.
And a lot of people that I talked to, like even in older generations of leaders, they were saying that one way to talk about these issues is to interpret the Bible in a different way. So one of them said that, and well, actually a few of them suggested reading it as poetry. So instead of reading it from a historical perspective where like this exact thing happened and this, if you read it as poetry, it can still be really meaningful, but you interpret it in your own way instead of the way that like history is supposed to help you interpret something.
Whereas the fundamentalists would be like having a really hard time with that, right? But I see that, and I see it as an allegory. As life has been colorful enough for me that I realize that, please, I don't know. I don't believe that the earth was made in 6 days. I believe in evolution. I believe in science. I believe in what we know. So I hear you. And so then if you can see it that way, and you can also see it culturally, then I think you stop making it a rule book and this dualism, right? Like bad, what's bad, what's good, what's heaven, what's hell, what's,
Yeah, and he wasn't saying that it wasn't true, because this man was very religious, but he was just saying that if you read it in that way, it can still be like very, very meaningful. But he said that if you read it in any other way, it doesn't really give it what it deserves. He was like, it deserves better, like more than that. It's more complicated than that. Yeah.
That's so interesting. Well, and I just know, like, when I think back, and this could also be the lens that I'm seeing it through at the moment, because I am on a very kind of like fuck your couch kind of moment, as far as like how I'm seeing the patriarchy in the church, and like even the creation story as like the very beginning of women screwing everything up, right? And women being stupid, sexy women, and making a mess of things because of their sexiness. And so I kind of am like, okay, yeah, I can see it as poetry. I can see it as metaphor. I can see it as culture. And yeah, even me, there are times that I still read the Bible and go like, ooh, tear, you know, it still is something that spiritually has some depth, right? Especially all the work of like Christ is the shiznit, right? So anyway.
My brother.
My
father.
My
brother, Holy Spirit.
Well, I remember actually when I was doing this research about the original word for, we know when it talks about in the beginning was the word was with God, the word was God, right? How that word as ethos was actually a secondary translation. And the original, because the ethos is a masculine, means like the masculine word, whereas the original was, Sophia was the original, which is a female pronoun, which means that the original Christ in the beginning was the word, and the word was with God, and the word was God, was Sophia, which is a chick. So therefore, all of this patriarchy and like Jesus and, you know, the ladies are just a secondary character. No, ma'am.
Do you know what's so funny? When I first started, so my main advisor is a feminist scholar, which I was so freaking lucky because she's incredible. And so she really understood like where my personal narrative was coming from. And one of the questions she asked me when I started researching was, what's the difference between religion and patriarchy? And I went home and I was like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, it's literally the same thing.
Yeah.
And I'm glad she forgot about that question, because 2 weeks later, she didn't ask me again, because I was like, I don't have an answer. Like, I researched it, and every time you look up the two, they're always together. So it's kind of...
It's true.
Yeah.
Well, and it's hard because a lot of us find homes in the church, and our first kind of extended family is a church family, and the church building feels like home to a certain extent. And then at the same time, it also feels like the place where you're rejected most. You know, if you're somebody like me who has a big personality, you're basically taught to like shut up.
To dim your light, yeah.
Yeah, to shrink in every way possible. So that means if you're curvy, to calm your sexuality down. If you have a big personality, to be quieter, to basically turn into the kind of woman that is marriage material. And to me, I'm like, that always was tough because I just never fit in. I never fit in. And so as much as like it was someplace that I was all the time and I did love some of the people there, it was tough. Okay, so we're talking about how the church is in some sects is changing and is evolving to be more tolerant and more kind of, I don't know, nuanced sexually.
Yeah, so that was one of the big ones that came up, was the interpretation of the Bible. The second one was, because since I am studying like sex and sexuality, a lot of my questions were about that. So another way it's changing with these younger leaders, like most of them were in their 20s or 30s that I talked to. They were saying that, like I have this one friend who's a nurse and an ordained minister. So she talks about it from a healthcare perspective, basically just talking about like what respect looks like to your body and like what consent is. And I say that word a lot because consent is so important.
So important.
And they talk about establishing what a healthy relationship looks like, instead of just being like, don't have sex before marriage, don't do this, don't do that, like you should be ashamed about this. They're like, this is what a healthy relationship looks like, and this is how you should feel about yourself when you're with someone, versus the opposite.
That's amazing.
No, it's like I'm super happy that this is going on, because I kind of just had a guess, but I'm glad that it's actually like people are actually doing stuff about it.
But what in the research, what was the blockage? Like, what are the things that are still the stubborn stains that we can't get out?
Yeah.
What have you found?
I'm gonna sound so scholarly because I'm like, I remember that there were 3. So one of the biggest barrier, I think, to having religion change completely at the moment is definitely a generational gap. Because, you know, there's like such differences between someone who's 25 versus someone who's 65, and everywhere in between. Like, everyone has their own experiences of where they grew up. And a few people all said the exact same thing. They were saying that to be able to talk to other generations about these issues, you need to speak in a language that they understand. So that's why it's kind of, you know, there was one person I interviewed who said that the biggest tension is within religious communities, because like you're expected to think and feel the same way.
For sure.
But there's also an advantage, because then you can talk to them in that religious language about how they're feeling about something might not be best for
I
us,
think that's really interesting. And if you can stay together in that community and open up a dialogue, I think that's really valuable. Whereas I think what we want to do, and what I see happening a lot with my friends like in LA versus where they grew up in the South, or my friends in Vancouver as opposed to where they grew up in the prairie provinces, is that you just end up finding your own kind of gluten-free church community. Right? And like you all hang out together and you like sing songs with different pronouns, and you have a gluten-free option on Communion Sunday, and and you find your own place. And then the older generation says, that's not a real church community, that's not a real Christian community, and that dialogue never happens. Right? Like I know my parents feel that way about like different denominations that are more accepting. They do feel like, oh, this isn't a real church. Like it's a church building, but it's not a real church. This isn't real Christianity. As if like the shame and the dualism is actually what creates the church. The us versus them is what creates the legitimacy. And if you're not toiling and miserable in some way, then you're not actually earning your holiness. Right? So it's interesting to like hear you say that. Like I think that's absolutely true. But I think then, just like going to Thanksgiving at your parents' house and talking politics, which makes you want to jab yourself in the eye with your fork. It's having those conversations and like staying on the phone and not hanging up on your parents and like, actually having that dialogue. That's so hard to do.
It is still very challenging. I think another one, so we already talked about education in the last one. I don't know if we want to bring that up again. Yeah, we can bring it
up a little bit just in case people haven't seen the other one.
Yeah. So that's like another huge barrier to getting these new views out there is education and how it's taught. Like either how it's talked about in the church or at home or in school or wherever. Like these new views of sex positivity, I'll say, because that's kind of the main point of my research was to like promote sex positivity and religion. But getting that out there is just really hard when education is so limited.
Well, and for me, I know like no one ever sat me down and had a conversation about my own autonomy and my body being mine and what it looks like to be in a relationship where consent is a thing and where enjoyment is a thing and where you're comfortable enough with each other. It was only don't have sex before you're married or you fail, or before you're married or you fail. And so now that I potentially have those conversations, it's totally new ground to be like, am I saying the right thing? Am I saying the wrong thing? I think I'm saying the right thing, but I don't know because it's totally new to try to teach the next generation or people that you're mentoring even how to have that conversation and have that power, that personal power to own their sexuality and even when we're still kind of wrestling with the shame and sex thing ourselves, right? To try to introduce it to the next generation in a new way, I think is a really tall order, but is such an important, balance to try to strike. I don't know. It's tough because like I know like when you say like what was you were saying like enjoyment in sex and like freedom in sex. That to me like there is a little flag that goes up in my head when I hear that and I'm like, ooh, it sounds like the wheels are about to come off and I'm about to just, I don't know. There's still a very strong shame framework in my head that it's so hard to like break that down.
One of the most frustrating things too is talking to people. So when people would ask me what I was researching and I would say sex and sexuality within like Christianity, they'd be like, oh, are you going to talk about the priests that like whatever, you know where I'm going with this.
I do,
and like, we've seen Spotlight and a lot of journalists have covered these topics and it is really heartbreaking that like the Catholic Church let people get away with this for so long, but it's frustrating because that's all people know. Like that's the only narrative that people know. So when I talk about sex and sexuality and Christianity, that's just the only thing that people think about. And one of the things that I discovered, there's this woman in Victoria that teaches a class in like religion in the news, and she was just saying that every time religion is talked about, especially with sexuality, it's always when it's a source of conflict, and so people don't know that that there is an option for it to be talked about in a better way, or that it's even that it's even a possibility,
right?
Because it's never been covered, or it hasn't been covered.
Absolutely. Well, and I know that that's the thing for sure. Like, as far as like, as soon as anything comes up with religion, especially if it's anything positive or any growth, that's happening, there is that, and it's a wound, right? Like, it's valid, it's a wound, but there is a difference between. They're both absolutely valid, and obviously we're not saying that, you know, what's happened in Catholicism and the tragedy that's happened there, but again, sexual repression leads to trauma. So, and it's a different malformation of the same disease, right? When you teach people that God says sex is dirty and wrong, because sex is a natural manifestation of our humanness, it's going to show itself in a different way that might not be healthy or maybe even destructive. Yeah. Right? Like, I have friends that I went to college with who were gay, men and women, who it took them a decade to be able to actually, or more than that, some of them 20 plus years that it's taken for them to really be able to own their sexual orientation in a way that is comfortable for them. And even now, I know that it's not actually that comfortable for them, but they're just starting to get their legs under them in that way. And that until then, a lot of people got hurt because they were trying to fit themselves into this other mold that they really didn't have a natural fit. So it's interesting. And I know people who like hold on to their virginity forever as well. I feel like something happens to them emotionally and spiritually that is not healthy. I can see it in your eyes when I'm looking at you and you're 40 and you're still a virgin because you think Jesus has told you it's a sin. You know, there is a malformation that happens there. That'd be interesting actually for research. But
to do interviews with that. Have you read this book called Come As You Are by Emily Nagoski? No, it's not COME, but the cover is like, it's an object that just is in the shape of a vagina. So like, you know.
Okay, gotcha. Perfect.
It's an incredible book. It's by this woman who is a psychologist and sex therapist. And it is such a cool way of looking at sexuality. Like, it's targeted for women, but it's still a really important book to read. But when you read about sexuality from a psychology point of view, it just talks about it as biology. Like, you know, and she talks about how there was this narrative made up. So women have a hymen, you know, that gets broken when you have sex. So it's seen as a barrier. But, you know, if you've ever talked to a guy who's uncircumcised and he talks about having sex for the first time, it's really painful for them too. Like, I don't know if I just discovered that recently. Someone was talking to me about how like his first time was really painful because, I don't know, something to do with it. And we don't have to go into it. We all know what a dick looks like, but and so
the little anteater steel gets broken.
So like women are taught that like it's painful because it's supposed to be this like barrier against pleasure, but then, you know, there are some men that experience that as well, and so it's kind of just like a narrative that we made up as a culture, and then kind of mix that in with religion somehow. Like, I don't know when it happened. I don't know why, but yeah.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
Wow, so it is both of us.
Well,
wow. Yeah, that's
depending.
Well, and it's like the metaphors are so easy to come by when it comes to women, you know, like the breaking of the hymen and you know, losing your virginity. It's like all of the different cultures around the world that use that as like is she still worthy? Is she still pure? Is she still of value? Yeah. Right? That's so interesting.
Isn't that cool? I was like freaked out when you told me this because I was like, you're joking, because no one's ever.
No.
Yeah.
Because men's value has never been attached to their sexuality. So when there was something measurable for a woman to say whether or not you were of value, that was an easy thing, right? So even if it was something they knew when not as many people were circumcised, they were not talking about it probably in nearly the same way because it's like it didn't have anything to do with your identity, right? Anyway, is there more as far as like we were talking about? I think we're on number 2, or is there number 3?
Yeah, those are for barriers. It's just, but also for things that are changing. I forgot to mention that there's a lot of like LGBTQ plus inclusivity, especially within the leadership positions. Because like one of my best friends is a gay minister, and like obviously he's still So it's with Community of Christ.
Okay.
I don't even know. I honestly don't. It's my church, and I don't even know what they are.
So they could be just
They broke off from the Mormon church like in the early 2000s, so it's still pretty. I know it's Protestant, but I'm not sure like which branch.
Use the Church of the Mormon literature?
No.
Okay.
But yeah, like they just allowed gay ministers a few years ago. It was when I was still in college, but that wasn't that long ago. So maybe like 4 or 5 years ago. But yeah, so that's really great because they're leaning towards more like inclusivity and like more women as leaders as well, which a lot of people don't allow.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
It's crazy to me to like go back to like my parents' style church, which isn't even compared to like some of the ones that you'll find in the South. It's pretty conservative, but it's not as conservative as some, and they don't have women like preaching from the pulpit. My church here, even, or that I used to go to a lot more than I haven't been in months and months and months and months and months. But the church I go to here sometimes is an Anglican church, but it's not even like the kind of more progressive. Like they have women who went to Regent and graduated with like doctoral, studies, like, and are amazing scholars, and they won't have them preach from the pulpit because of, they're wearing their testicles on the inside instead of on the outside, and it's ridiculous to me. Like, just tuck them on in there.
Which church is this?
It's St. John's. That's why I'm very involved. St. John's Anglican.
Okay.
And
I think that I almost interviewed someone from there.
Yeah. So, the pastor or the priest pastor or whatever is awesome. Like, he's a really great guy. I'm good friends with his wife. There are a lot of very liberal-minded, amazing people that go there. Whereas, like, the other church that I go to, one of my friend's churches, is another one of those kind of like Christ Church or like really liberal. And they do have gluten-free wafers on Sunday. To my parents, I call it my gluten-free church. Because it is very inclusive, very liberal, very like really trying to make sure that nobody ever doesn't feel uncomfortable. The pronouns are changed. They don't say Lord that much because it is masculine, and there's a part of me that still has that, like, the patriarchy in my body when you grew up that way, and it's like bashed into your head all the time. And I do like the women who preach there, who are, I think that they're lesbians, and it doesn't matter either way, but I just tell you that in as much to say, like, it is totally open. But it's interesting, and it's something to pay attention to for those of us who grew up in those kind of churches, those like evangelical fundamentalist churches, is that there is that part of you that is going to kind of want to bucket in the same way that your parents do, because it is in your bones to go like, I don't really like the way they're doing that. Oh, this is really dumb. Like, you kind of have those opinions because you really kind of imbibe those beliefs when the patriarchy is so like nailed into your brain.
Yeah.
I don't know. Because did you grow up in church, or you just went to Bible college?
Yeah, I went to church on and off growing up, but I wasn't really invested in it until I started going to senior high camps in high school.
Right.
Yeah.
That's big.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, it's a mess, especially if you grew up and you're gay in the church, or you grew up and you're feminine and you're a lot in the church. There's a lot of bullshit there. There's a lot of stuff to get out of your system, and to then have to deconstruct and try to rebuild a spiritual life from. And sometimes that means, going to other faiths, and sometimes that means just finding a new set of coping mechanisms and spiritual practices that can bring you back to that centeredness.
Yeah.
But just like going to Bible camp and going to Bible college in some cases, there is a lot of beauty there, and you meet a lot of your like bosom buddies there that you are friends with your whole life.
Yeah, that's very true.
And so it can be a family, it can be a beautiful thing, and it also can be a source of huge trauma and repression and shame. And for women, especially women and the LGBTQ plus community, in a lot of ways it absolutely is, and it is in ways that we don't even realize until we have gone and detoxed from it. So
yeah, talking about that community of people, one of the cool things that I discovered when like interviewing people was that a lot of them are saying like what constitutes ministry has changed. So when people identify as religious, it doesn't necessarily mean that they go to church every Sunday or they're part of a specific church. Like it could mean that they're spiritual and that their religion is kind of like acted out in how they treat people instead of like just following a list of rules, you know?
Right. I think that dualism seems to be dying. You know what I mean when I say dualism? That like I'm right, you're wrong, this is right, this is wrong.
Right. Yeah.
Like there's two ways and one was right and one is wrong.
Yeah.
And that kind of like is exclusionary and also is really ego based, right? And I think that as we evolve, that is what is dying. We hope. We will have like, I think those like geysers of bigotry that at least politically seem to come up every once in a while where like it's like a step backwards, but as a whole, we're moving forward.
Yeah, there's actually research that backs that up, so you're not crazy when you say
so
that.
Smart.
Yeah. The researchers that I mentioned before, I can say their names again. It's Heather Shipley and Pamela Dickey-Young from Ontario. They when they did their research with youth and sexuality in Canada, what they discovered from like these hundreds of people that they talked to was that a lot of them are like picking and choosing the parts of religion that really work for them and kind of like getting rid of the stuff that doesn't.
Yeah.
And so when you say that it's changing, like it really is. It's just you know, changing with each generation. And so it's going to take a while to kind of implement into something that's more like whole other than just kind of all over the place.
Wow. It's such an important conversation to have. And it's so important as women that have learned this kind of as the first generation to have learned this, that it's okay to like have pleasure and to you know your body and to be autonomous. You know, I think it's important to have these conversations and go like, oh, you feel the same way? Oh, you've had the same experience, right? Because we all have.
Yeah.
And it really is so empowering to all of us to know that we're not alone. So then when we're having those conversations with the next generation, we can kind of have more strength and there's even a bigger community and a bigger tribe to be able to have those conversations and to build a new ethos that isn't steeped in shame and bullshit and patriarchy. Because fuck the patriarchy.
Fuck the patriarchy.
That's right. Anyway, I think this research is so important, and I'm so glad. Like, I'm thrilled that we were able to reconnect over it. Like,
me too.
I think it's really amazing. So
yes, it's all in my brain, so I need to get it out somewhere.
well, we appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah.
On these two amazing episodes. If you have not watched the Feminist Friday that precedes this one, it is the grittier of the two. Please make sure that you watch it. Also, if you're into the content, please subscribe and ring the little bell. It'll be content like this, as well as obviously original music and other shit. So yeah, and share it on your social. Thanks so much. Bye. Thank you so much, Laryssa.
Bye.
Bye.